Chapter 551. I have a good idea. No! The Diatoranian God of War is the head of the 5 war gods. He'll never run away. He's headed to West Aridlands, Finn said. West Aridlands? Shouldn't he be fighting enemy troops in South Aridlands? Why did he go to the west instead? Willow asked, slightly confused. Quinton Hans suddenly betrayed our country, and our king was held hostage. After hearing the news, the Diatoranian God of War rushed to West Aridlands immediately to rescue the king, Finn answered. I didn't expect Caspian to have killed Quinton, Zoey said in shock. News about the king is everywhere today. They all said the king has been rescued, but I didn't expect Caspian to be the one behind it. Willow was somewhat astonished, too. Both Willow and Zoey had read news about the suppression of Quinton's revolts. They had no idea who had saved the king, though, as the news articles were simple and to the point, merely telling them that the revolts were suppressed, and that the king was safe and sound. The fewer words there were about something, the more serious it was. Those wise words were absolutely correct. Yes, the Diatoranian God of War led the armored battalion against Quinton, whom they killed before rescuing the king. Finn nodded. Hearing Finn confirm it, both Willow and Zoey were astonished. Caspian was too powerful. He suddenly became more noble and capable in their hearts. It was as if there was nothing in this world that Caspian could not do. The problem in West Aridlands has been dealt with, hasn't it? How long will it take before Caspian returns to South Aridlands? Willow asked. I'm sorry, but I have no idea. Mrs. Lynch, you should quickly pack up your things. We'll escort you away from Southlake City, Finn said, his voice laced with anxious impatience. Where will we go if we are to leave Southlake City? Willow asked. Garthram, we've already made preparations in advance. You'll be safer there, Finn said. They had already prepared for this in advance. Sure, I'll pack my things now. Willow nodded. She could only listen to orders obediently at this point. She would be causing Caspian trouble if she refused to comply. Willow didn't have many belongings in the villa. She only took with her some underclothes, as well as the things Caspian's adoptive mother had left behind since they held significant meaning for Caspian. After they were almost done packing up, Willow and Zoey prepared to evacuate the place. They suddenly had to leave after living in the villa for so long. Willow still couldn't bear to leave the place. Zoey was reluctant to leave, too. Both she and Willow were already used to staying there. Mrs. Lynch, Ms. Yanez, let's go, Finn pressed. Will the enemy troops attack this place? When that time comes, won't our villa be snatched away? Willow asked in worry. I can't say for sure. If the Diatoranian God of War rushes back, he'll surely be able to turn the tide, Finn said. Wasn't there just news about the upper hand Diatoran has gained in the battles over at South Aridlands? Why did the situation take such a huge turn overnight? Willow asked, confused. The Diatoranian God of War left South Aridlands yesterday. After the enemy troops heard about that, they started launching a fierce attack there, Finn answered. Why did they attack right after Caspian left? Willow asked another question. Because the Diatoranian God of War wins every war he fights in. His reputation intimidates everyone under the skies. The enemies fear him greatly. As long as he's present on the battlefield, the enemy troops will not dare take any rash action, Finn explained. I didn't expect him to be so powerful, Willow couldn't help but exclaim. Surprisingly, Caspian was more powerful than she thought. Even the enemy troops feared him. The Diatoranian God of War has fought in countless wars and has won every one of them. Let's evacuate now. He'll surely succeed in repelling the enemy forces once he returns, Finn pressed. Sure. Zoey, let's leave this place for now, Willow said. Okay, we'll surely come back someday, Zoey said. The two women got in the car and left Southlake City under the protection of the armored battalion. Some members of the battalion were also driving the two luxury cars parked outside the villa. After hearing the news from the authorities, the civilians in Southlake City were also preparing to leave. Some people had already fled, even. The prominent businessmen and politicians in the city were also preparing to evacuate. A good half of their properties and businesses were based in Southlake City, but in a situation like this, their priority was to stay alive. This was the cruelty of war. The first thing everyone had to consider was how to stay alive. The Stewarts were also preparing to leave. Isn't Caspian a 5-star general? He's the chief commander, too. Yet he can't even protect Southlake City. Marilyn huffed angrily. She was filled with hatred for Caspian. Mom, you can't blame Caspian for this. He is the chief commander, but the situation on the battlefield can change completely in the blink of an eye. Unforeseen circumstances are completely normal. Diatoran is surrounded by enemies now. Astronia and Vadesia have put in all the resources and manpower they have. Even a powerful general won't be able to counter them fully, Carl said as he stood up. Even in such a difficult time, you're still backing Caspian up. That useless lump he is. I don't know what's up with the king, really. Why did he make that good-for-nothing Caspian the chief commander? Marilyn cursed. Mom, you can't say things like this rashly. If someone out there happened to know that you insulted the king in this way, the Stewart family would be done for. Let's leave Southlake City quickly. It'll be safer in Garthram, Donald said. Marilyn sighed gloomily. She continued, all the properties and businesses that make up the foundation of our family are in this city. Thanks to Caspian, we'll no longer be able to hold on to them. In special circumstances such as this, where there is gunfire everywhere, staying alive is already quite a difficult feat, Carl said. Even a good-for-nothing like Caspian could be a commander. Diatoran's probably done for. I really don't want to leave Southlake City. The century-old foundation of our family is here, Marilyn said as she couldn't bear to part with the place. At this moment, Henry stood up and said, I know of a way we can stay here in Southlake City, Grandma. We won't need to escape. Either. A few days ago, Richard and Nicholas had come to seek him out. They had told him something important. After considering it for days, Henry made the decision to join them. What ways can there be? Marilyn asked in bemusement. They could only flee in this situation, right? She knew that this grandson of hers wasn't that capable. Henry fell short even when compared to her adoptive grandson, Fabian. Unfortunately, Marilyn didn't want to think back on what had happened in the past. The Stewart family became a mess ever since Caspian had shown up. I have an idea, Grandma, and a good one at that, Henry said animatedly. Chapter 552, the final baseline. Grandma, Diatoran is currently surrounded and attacked by several countries. Although we have won some battles in West Aridlands, the future situation isn't in Diatoran's favor. Diatoran might fall, Henry said. Everyone can see that. I'm asking you if you know of a way we can stay in Southlake City, Marilyn said exasperatedly. Diatoran is surrounded by enemies and will eventually be defeated. We might as well seek refuge in Vadesia. With that, we don't need to leave Southlake City, and the businesses under our family won't be affected. Henry told them his opinions. Richard had taught him to say these things. After everyone heard Henry's words, their faces darkened. They were all surprised that Henry was suggesting that they betray their country. Immediately after, Carl scolded him loudly. Bastard! The Stewart family isn't a powerful, noble family. But we've been in Diatoran for generations. We'll never defect to another country. The situation on the battlefield isn't even clear yet. Yet you want to commit treason after the slightest hint of difficulty. Uncle Carl, we'll die if we don't find a way out. Diatoran is surrounded by enemies, and it's evident that the country cannot defend itself against them. We might as well take this chance to pave our own path to survival, Henry said. Things will never end well for those who commit treason. Is Quinton Hans' death not horrible enough for you? I heard that he was beheaded, even. The ideal you proposed is going to destroy the family, Carl snapped. You're too cautious, Uncle Carl. The situation is clear as day. Diatoran won't succeed in defending itself against its enemies, so what if we move to Garthram? We'll still end up dead once the enemies invade the city, Henry argued. If we betray our country, the family will be met with a terrible ending. When Diatoran wins the war, the Stewart family will be wiped out, Carl frowned. Uncle Carl, Grandma's the head of the family, so let's hear what she has to say. Henry was of the opinion that Marilyn would surely betray her country for the sake of survival. After a long silence, Marilyn spoke. Henry, your Uncle Carl is right. Although the Stewarts aren't a noble family, we can't do anything that's looked down on by the people in our country. Marilyn was calculating and snobbish, but she was still the head of the Stewart family. When faced with things that were either right or wrong, she had her own principles. Henry was surprised that his grandmother, who usually did whatever benefited her most, would have such a staunch attitude at a time like this. The situation is really bleak now, Grandma. If we don't get in touch with Vadesia soon, we'll be without a home when Diatoran is defeated, Henry said anxiously. That's enough. Stop talking about that. The Stewart family can never do anything against Diatoran, or we'll have to repent for our sins in the afterlife, Marilyn said seriously. This is our only chance. Grandma, If we don't seek refuge in Vadesia now, our properties will go to other people when Southlake City falls. And we'll end up homeless. Henry had already defected to the enemy along with Richard and the others. He didn't want to wait in Southlake City for death to befall him. Have you already defected to another country, you bastard? Marilyn barked sharply. Henry shook his head repeatedly, explaining, No. The enemy hasn't attacked yet, so why would I defect to them? Why are you so panicked? Then, are you lying? Marilyn asked again.
I'm just a bit scared of you, Grandma.
You're the head of the family, too. I wouldn't dare to take any action before you've given your approval, would I? Noticing how firm Marilyn's attitude was, Henry dared not say much. He would surely be punished if the old lady were to know that he had already defected along with Richard and the others. Defectors will be looked down on by every single person in Diatoran, so never bring this up again. People would have misconceptions about us if word ever got out, Marilyn said. Exactly. Henry, you must be careful under such special circumstances. You should never say things like this rashly, Donald quickly advised as well. I'll disown you if I hear you talk about this again. Donald was also a calculating man, but he had some degree of power within the family. He didn't want to be known as a traitor to his country, either. Henry noticed that both his grandmother and parents were against him. They were reprimanding him too, and that filled him with annoyance and anger. Why are you all so stubborn? What's in it for us if we're loyal to Diatoran? If we don't seek refuge in Vadesia, we'll have to live under Caspian's shadow our whole lives. Do you want Caspian to lord over us our whole lives? After Henry had said his piece, everyone was stunned. No one had expected Henry to say something so unabashedly disrespectful. Bastard! We're all Diatoranians. Is there any problem with supporting our own country? Diatoran is indeed facing a crisis now. But should we defect to another country just because of that? Everyone will talk about us behind our backs if we do so, Marilyn said. 4 countries are attacking Diatoran right now, but Diatoran is still guarding its borders with determination. As of now, Diatoran hasn't let its enemies take a step forward toward our lands. Henry, if you insist on saying more things like this, the Stewart family will cut you off, Carl said with righteous indignation. Even if we feel humiliated in front of Caspian, we can't betray Diatoran. What's between Caspian and us is just a personal grudge and has nothing to do with Diatoran. If we betray our country, the Stewart family will become an enemy of Diatoran, Donald added. Henry didn't expect the day to come when he would be on the opposing side against everyone in his family. He just wanted to protect the foundational businesses of the family. Yet he was scolded and belittled by everyone like he was worthless. You're all stubborn old farts. We're in a modern age, yet you're still stuck in the old ways. If we don't do anything for our own sake, we'll end up dying. If we defect to Vadesia now, Vadesia will surely support us as we gain our footing in Southlake City in the wake of Diatoria's defeat. Perhaps the Stewart family will become richer and more powerful after that. Henry bit out. I'm pissed at you, you bastardly child. Marilyn raised her cane and whopped Henry with it. She asked in fury, Be honest with me. Are you in cahoots with anyone from Vadesia? Henry had been treated well by the family ever since he was little. He had never gotten a single beating before. He couldn't fathom why the family was so adamantly against his suggestion. You misunderstand, Grandma. I'm just discussing this with you. Henry wasn't so dumb as to confess to it rashly, but he had actually reached an agreement with Richard and the others to defect to Vadesia together. Why would you say something so strange? Then, did Vadesia promise you anything? Marilyn asked sharply. If you have defected to the enemy, you can still turn back now. It's not too late. Otherwise, no one can save you. Do you think you can believe your enemy's words? They just want to use you to create chaos in Southlake City. When you no longer have any value to them, your death will be near. Since time immemorial, misfortune has befallen every person who has chosen to betray. Marilyn advised earnestly. Chapter If you don't plan for yourself, misfortune will befall you. We're done here. That's all I'll say to you. Pack up your things now. You're gonna follow us to Garthram, Donald said. Sure. Henry nodded. He was very reluctant, but he dared not say more when faced with the objection from all other members of his family. He could only formulate his plans slowly. When the time came, he would ask Richard and Nicholas for their opinions. The archers had also heard word from the Southlake authorities on evacuating the city. They didn't want to leave the place they had been born and bred in, either. The businesses that make up the foundation of our family are all here, but now we're forced to leave due to the war. I don't want to, Lawrence bemoaned. Exactly. I don't know what's up with Diatoran, really, They're giving up on Southlake City, Vince said. It's all because of Caspian Lynch. Isn't he the chief commander? He must have decided to give up on Southlake City because he's useless, Susan said sarcastically. I don't know why the king had elected a good-for-nothing like Caspian as chief commander. He must have been blind. Could someone so useless really lead troops in battle? Nicholas said bitterly. Caspian must have decided to give up on Southlake City because he found the enemy's attacks to be too aggressive and thus wasn't confident that he could win against them. Everything is his fault. Now, we're forced to evacuate, and our businesses will be snatched away by other people, Lawrence barked. Having directed the conversation toward the main topic, Nicholas decided that it was time he brought it up. Grandpa, I have a good idea if you don't want to leave our family home here and want to secure the family businesses. Oh, what good idea might that be? Lawrence asked. Would Nicholas really have something up his sleeve? Diatoran is surrounded by enemy troops, which won't be held off for long. We might even end up without a home to go back to. I think we should just seek refuge in Vadesia. Not only do we not need to leave Southlake City, but we can also hold on to the family businesses, Nicholas said. Everyone in the family was shocked. They didn't expect Nicholas to have thought of something so bold. Traitors are looked down on by other people, and we might even be killed for that, Lawrence said in shock. Diatoran will fall eventually, Grandpa. Who will give us trouble if the country is gone? Nicholas explained. How are you so sure that Diatoran will lose? Lawrence asked. The enemy troops are extraordinarily aggressive in West Aridlands. I heard the troops there are almost at their limit. If we go by that, it won't take long until West Aridlands is breached. The Estrian troops are also attacking us aggressively in East Aridlands. The East is also in danger of being breached. As for South Aridlands, Caspian Lynch, that useless general, has run away due to his cowardice. They've already given up on Southlake City. They've achieved short-term victory in North Aridlands, but the enemy might come back some other time. When that time comes, the country will be surrounded by enemies from all four sides. How can Diatoran possibly hold its own against them? If you ask me, Diatoran's defeat is certain. If these countries gang up against Diatoran, they might directly divide the territory among themselves. Now that the enemy troops haven't invaded the city, we should quickly defect to Vadesia. Only with that will Vadesia let us off the hook. We'll also have a protective shield above us. Nicholas laid out all his opinions. His family members were all in deep thought after listening to him. They all found his opinions to be somewhat sound. Let me ask everyone a question. What are your opinions on this? Lawrence asked. I think that's doable, Dad. Nicholas is right. No matter who will occupy this place, it's none of our business. I'm fine no matter what if it means that we can hold on to our businesses. This is indeed a good time to seek refuge in Vadesia. This seems doable to me, too, Dad. Even someone so useless as Caspian Lynch can be a general in the Diatoranian military. From that, we can see there aren't enough capable people in Diatoran. I would rather take the initiative to strike instead of waiting here for our deaths. We must find ourselves a way out, and we must do it quickly, Susan said emphatically. This matter is of some significance. I think we should discuss it a bit more, Lawrence said, somewhat worried. Dad, our family has a grudge against Caspian. If we can't find someone else to back us up, how will we fight against Caspian after we lose our businesses? He'll laugh at us too. He insulted Nicholas in public once and took the girl he liked away from him. Southlake Corporation is also refusing to work with us. If we seek refuge in Vadesia, we'll get a chance to show Caspian what we're capable of. And we'll feel better after that, Susan said. Please make a decision regarding this, Mr. Archer Sr. Yes, please. We might have a shot at survival if we seek refuge in Vadesia now. Exactly. If we make a choice now, we can hold on to our family businesses. The family members spoke one after another. They had already been swayed. Great. We'll settle on this. The Archer family will seek refuge in Vadesia immediately, Lawrence said decisively. When Nicholas heard Lawrence's decision, he felt excited. You've made a wise decision, Mr. Archer Sr. Under your leadership, the Archer family will surely become the most powerful family in Southlake City. You're so decisive when taking action, Mr. Archer Sr. This choice you made will surely ensure that our businesses are secured. We'll become a powerful family after that. The family members started boasting about their family and praising Lawrence, which he liked. He looked at Nicholas with a smile and asked, Nicholas, among the many enemy troops attacking Diatoran, why do you think Vadesia is the more reliable choice? Vadesia, Estronia, and Filron are all very powerful countries. They're all equally good choices, actually, Nicholas said. How do we get in touch with the people from Vadesia, though? Will they take us in? Lawrence asked, worried. Leave this to me, Grandpa. I've actually talked to a secret agent from Vadesia named Kenzie, Nicholas said proudly. What? You've already reached an agreement with Vadesia? When did you do that? Lawrence asked in shock. Yes. Kenzie has already promised that we'll become one of the most powerful families in Southlake City if we defect to them, Nicholas said excitedly. That's great. I didn't expect you to be so clever, Nicholas. You've already found an escape route for the family. Lawrence could not stop praising him. Chapter 554. Alicia was put under house arrest. I'm a member of the Archer family, Grandpa. Of course I'd find a way out for our family. Hearing Lawrence's praise, Nicholas was ecstatic. If we defect to Vadesia, we can stay in Southlake City, right? Lawrence asked. Of course. If we defect to Vadesia, it means we're on their side. We won't be unharmed even if they invade Southlake City, Nicholas said. Send a reply to Kenzie immediately and tell him that we, the Archer family, have already decided to defect to Vadesia, Lawrence said. Yes, Grandpa, I'll get in contact with him right away, Nicholas nodded. The Hudson family was also in dire straits. Naturally, they didn't want to give up on their businesses in Southlake City as well. However, they didn't have any better solutions. Richard took the chance to share with them the solution he thought of, which was to seek refuge in Vadesia, and the family ultimately decided to do so. Alicia was worried, though. Betraying one's country is punishable by a death sentence. I think this isn't a good solution, as it might put the family in danger. I hope that everyone can think about it more carefully, Alicia advised. You're just my granddaughter-in-law. You don't have the right to dictate what the family's going to do, so just do as we say, Richard's grandfather, Grant Hudson, said. Alicia, your excessive kindness has no place here. You shouldn't stick your nose into the family's business, either, Richard reprimanded. What? Do I not even have the right to speak? Committing treason is a serious crime. What you're doing now is bringing about your own destruction, Alicia said with righteous indignation. How rude. What do you know? You're only my granddaughter-in-law? Do nothing, and the family will lose our family wealth. Only after seeking refuge in Vadesia will we have a way out, Grant snapped. The situation in Diatoran indeed doesn't look good, but you're thinking of defecting to the enemy when our soldiers are fighting on the battlefield. What if the Diatoranian troops succeed in repelling the enemy? The Hudsons would become criminals should that happen, wouldn't you? Perhaps no one in the family would survive. I don't want to be alongside you as you dig your hole and die in it, Alicia said. You're too young and stupid. How is Diatoran supposed to repel the enemy? Who can realize it? Even a person so useless as Caspian Lynch could be a chief commander. Diatoran is doomed to fail, Grant said angrily. Alicia, can you shut up? You have no place to speak when in the presence of our family, Richard said sharply. Naturally, he was annoyed to see that Alicia was opposed to his idea. What do you mean by that? Richard Hudson. Are you saying I've lost my right to speak after marrying you? Am I not a member of the Hudson family now? Alicia snapped, annoyed. You're a member of the Hudson family, you do still know that. Grandpa's the one making the important decision now. So why are you sticking your nose in it? Richard said. How can you all be so blind? The Hudson family will be killed if this goes on, Alicia said. That's enough. Stop fighting. I've already decided that we're to defect to Vadesia. If you don't want to go to the right side with us, you're free to get out and go back to the Stewarts, Grant barked. I'll do that. Alicia left the room after saying that. Right after Alicia's departure, the family butler, Jack, came to a realization. Mr. Hudson Sr., what if Alicia tells someone else about our decision to defect after returning to the Stewarts? Everyone was stunned. Wait, you're right. Vadesia still hasn't taken Diatoran yet. What if Alicia tells someone else about our decision after she returns to her family home? We'll be doomed, Richard said. Everyone knew that it was extremely important for them to defect to Vadesia at this time. They would surely be in serious trouble if word of this got out. Stop her. Grant suddenly came to this realization as well. Yes, Grandpa. Richard chased after Alicia, along with several of his men. Right after Alicia left the Hudson Villa, Richard and the other men caught up to her. What are you doing? Richard. I won't go back there no matter what. Alicia thought Richard had caught up to her because he wanted her to go back into the family home. Alicia, you can't leave this place, Richard said. Why can't I? You asked me to get out of here, yet you refused to let me do so. What do you mean by this? Alicia asked angrily. I didn't mean what I said. You can't go back to the Stewart family home, Richard said. What do you want me to do? Then, you drove me out. Why can't I go back to the Stewarts? Alicia said exasperatedly, rolling her eyes. You don't have any say in that, Richard said viciously. I want to go back to my family. What can you do about that? Huh? I don't want to become a traitor along with you all. I'll feel ashamed to even bring this up to someone else, Alicia said, annoyed. Richard didn't want to continue discussing this with Alicia any further. He waved to his men, saying, Take her back into the house. The men surged forward and held Alicia down. What do you think you're doing, you bastards? Let me go, Alicia cursed. The humiliation she felt morphing into anger. The men didn't listen to her at all. Let's go. Take her back there, Richard said, waving again. Alicia was totally in shock. She realized that things were getting worse. What are you doing, Richard? Let me go. I want to go back to Stewart residence, Alicia screamed loudly. Richard didn't respond to that at all. Alicia was his wife, but he wouldn't give her any leeway. His family had already decided to defect to Vadesia. The family would be in grave danger if Alicia were to spread the word of that. Soon after, Alicia was taken back to the Hudson residence. Let me go! Let me go. I want to go home, Alicia roared in rage. What should we do next, Grandpa? Richard asked. Lock her in a room and keep a close watch over her. She can never be let out. Understood. Richard immediately gave an order. Lock her in a room and have several men keep watch outside it. Yes, sir. The men took Alicia away and locked her in a room. Alicia was in despair. She only had a different standpoint on this issue from the Hudsons, but now, she was unexpectedly put under house arrest. How dare they? Chapter 555 The Union Army is approaching. Let me go. I want to go back to Stewart residence. You're all bastards. Let me go. Alicia screamed till her voice was hoarse, but the men standing guard outside weren't moved at all. In the living room, Grant asked, How should we establish contact with Vadesia, Richard? Don't worry, Grandpa. Leave it to me. I've already agreed with Kenzie, a secret agent from Vadesia, Richard said. I didn't expect you to have already defected before this, Grant said, surprised. I'm doing this for the sake of the family. Grandpa, misfortune will befall us if we don't plan for our future, Richard answered. You're right. Has Kenzie said anything yet? Grant asked. Of course. He welcomes us with open arms. He's also promised me that Vadesia will support the Hudson family and ensure we establish a stable footing in Southlake City after the country achieves victory, Richard said happily. Great. Keep in contact with him. You should also tell him about the family's stance, Grant ordered. At this moment, Southlake City was in chaos. The streets were filled with people hauling suitcases. Diatoran had also made strategic plans and had sent out many vehicles to transfer the Diatoranians. As enemy ships came closer, the sounds of cannons firing could be heard outside Southlake City. The soldiers stationed at sea fought against the enemy troops, putting their lives on the line. Southlake City was already caught in the crossfire. As the chief of the Inspector General's office in Southlake City, Joey had no plans to leave the city. Every employee working for the office was carrying out their own responsibilities. As a general officer, Sylvia was organizing a defense along the shoreline. She was already prepared to fight to the end with her life on the line. 150,000 soldiers that had been transferred here from the Central Plains war zone were now under her command. Soldiers, the enemy troops are now launching a general offensive. It's time for us to protect our homes and defend our country. We must counter the enemy. Troops and guard our land, Sylvia shouted passionately. Protect our homes, defend our country, the men shouted in unison. As the enemy troops came closer and closer, many missile vehicles and fighter jets in Southlake City were deployed. The defense of the enemy troops was also very sturdy, though many missiles that were fired were blocked. Thanks to the efforts of the Diatoranian troops, the enemy could only advance at a slow speed. At this moment, a battle commenced in the air. Fighter jets took off continuously from West Aridlands into the sky, where they attacked enemy vessels. The citizens of Southlake City were even more terrified at the sight. They wanted to leave the city as soon as possible. The Stewarts were almost done packing up. However, Henry looked distracted as if he had something on his mind. He had promised Richard and Nicholas that he would convince his family to defect to Vadesia, but his family was opposed to it. He had made a decision, though. He would defect to Vadesia by himself even if his family had expressed their disapproval. He thought Diatoran had little chance of winning. Only by defecting to Vadesia would he get a chance at survival. However, his family objected to that and was preparing to leave Southlake City. They had also asked him to come along, but Henry didn't want to. He was constantly thinking of ways to sneak away without anyone noticing. I wonder how the preparations are going on Alicia's side, Henry's mother, Melinda, asked. You can call her and ask about it, Donald said. That's a good idea. Melinda nodded. However, Alicia was under house arrest, and her phone was taken away and was currently in Richard's hands. Richard quickly took the call when he saw that Melinda was calling. Did you need anything, Mom? Richard asked. Where's Alicia? I want to talk to her, Melinda said. Alicia's busy right now and isn't free. You can just tell me what you want to say to her, and I'll convey your message to her, Richard said. Nothing much. I'm just wondering if you're planning to leave Southlake City. It's total chaos out there now, you know. With the war going on, of course we're leaving the city, Richard lied. Oh, right, Mom. Are the Stewarts planning to evacuate too? What's going to happen to your properties? We have no choice but to leave. We'll lose our properties, but we can think of other ways to earn the money back. It's better than losing our lives, isn't it? Melinda said. Hearing that, Richard now knew that the Stewarts had no plans to defect to Vadesia. Okay, you should make preparations quickly. Let's get in contact when we have time in the future. Don't worry. I'll take good care of Alicia, Richard said. The call ended. After that, Donald's and Melinda's gazes met. They were no longer filled with worry. Let's pack up and leave this place too, Donald said. Dad, Mom, I'm going to the Hudson's place. I want to leave with Alicia. Henry had been worried because he had no way to sneak out, but he suddenly had a good idea. Alicia is preparing to leave as well. Why would you run around now instead of packing up your things? Donald asked. Our house is not that far away from the Hudsons anyway. I'm just going to visit Alicia. It's been a few days since I've seen her. It's total chaos out there, so I'm worried about her and want to pay her a visit, Henry explained. Sure. Then, you can go. Tell Alicia not to bring things she doesn't need. Her life comes before everything else, Donald said. Donald and Melinda were somewhat worried, seeing as Alicia didn't take the call. It would be nice if Henry went over and paid her a visit. I'll head out now. We'll meet in Garthram, Henry said. You're talking too much. Go now, Donald said. Henry got in his car and drove to the Hudson's home. The other members of the Stewart family didn't dally, either. They got in their cars, preparing to leave Southlake City. Though the Stewarts were spineless sheep for the most part, they were once an influential family in Southlake City. When it came to matters of principle, there were still lines they wouldn't cross. Henry arrived at the Hudson family home after a short time. Surprisingly, the Hudsons didn't look like they were preparing to leave. Is your family not leaving, Richard? Henry asked. Kenzie has agreed to welcome us, Henry. Is the Stewart family evacuating? Richard had already recruited Henry, so it was fine to tell him outright. Don't talk about it. I told my family about my plan to defect, but was reprimanded sternly. No one in the family was willing to defect, Henry said, somewhat helpless. Why are the Stewarts so dumb? Richard asked. I don't know either. I've gone into detail about my reasoning, but they refuse to listen. How are things on your side? Henry asked. The Hudsons aren't as stubborn as you lots. The whole family is preparing to defect to Vadesia, Richard boasted. Henry looked around and didn't see any trace of Alicia, so he asked, Hey, where's my sister? Chapter 556 Hard to come by. Your sister. Richard didn't know how to tell him that. Henry was Alicia's brother, after all. If Henry learned that Richard had locked his sister up in a room, he might end up making a scene. All of a sudden, Alicia, who was locked up in the room, started screaming, Help! Help! Let me out! Henry was confused when he heard Alicia's screams. What did you do to Alicia? Richard knew that the cat was out of the bag. He could only say candidly, she didn't want to defect to Vadesia, so we could only lock her up in a room for now in case she decided to give us trouble. What? She didn't want to defect? Too? Henry asked in surprise. Yes. Your family is really stubborn. Diatoran is 100% done for, and Vadesia will gain control over Southlake City when they defeat Diatoran. And yet your sister didn't want to go with our plan at all, Richard said. You didn't need to say that, Richard. Didn't I already decide to be on the same side as you all? The Stewarts didn't want to go with it, though. I feel helpless, too, Henry said. What are you planning to do now? Richard asked. He had to confirm Henry's stance on this. If Henry was still indecisive, the Hudsons would also lock him up. They were committing treason, after all. A slight misstep would cost them their lives. I do want to defect to Vadesia, but my family disapproves of it. Can I stay here in your home? I can stay here in Southlake City with you. Henry told Richard what he truly wanted. Sure, of course. You can stay here for now. When Vadesia invades the city, we'll become heroes. Richard nodded. Henry and him were on the same side now. Anyway. Have you heard back from Kenzie, Richard? Henry asked. We've gotten in contact with him and told him about our decision to defect. He has promised me that the family won't be unharmed when Southlake City falls, Richard said. That's great. As long as the Hudson family manages to defect to Vadesia, you'll have a great future ahead, Henry exclaimed. Of course. Kenzie has also promised me that they'll have a lot of important projects for the Hudson family to work on. The Hudson family is finally going to be a cut above the rest. Let me out! Help! Let me out of here! Alicia was shouting again. Can I see my sister, Richard? I can talk to her and make her see the reason, Henry said. It's useless no matter who's talking to her. Let her reflect on herself. I'll have someone deliver food to her, so don't worry about that, Richard said. In West Aridlands, Dax Santos, the champion of West Aridlands, had already been fighting in battle for more than 3 hours alongside the troops there. However, the enemy troops consisted of elite warriors. Their fighter jets fired missile after missile at the West Aridlands, causing the deaths of more than half of the Diatoranian soldiers there. Champion, the enemy troops are firing too aggressively. We won't be able to hold them back if this goes on. How long do we have until the God of War arrives? A general asked. We've been fighting non-stop for more than 3 hours. The God of War asked me to stand our ground for 4 hours. He'll surely be here on time, Dax said. But we're on the verge of collapse in the face of the enemy's attacks, the general said. The God of War will probably arrive soon. We can't fail at this moment. As long as he arrives, we'll surely succeed in repelling the enemy troops. We must continue to stand our ground even if we all end up dying, Dax said determinedly. Yes, sir. The general couldn't very well say anything else when Dax was alight with determination. Caspian, leading an army of 200,000 soldiers, was already coming at the Fulrenian troops from the back. Men, follow me and charge. It's your turn to protect your homes and guard the country now, Caspian ordered immediately. The army of 200,000 soldiers charged at the Fulrenian troops from the back. The enemy had not expected this to happen, and thus had not put up a defense against the Diatoranian army. The soldiers who had been under Quinton before fought with reckless abandon. When the Fulrenians came back to their senses, several thousand of their people had died. The Fulrenian generals took action in retaliation immediately. They divided their troops into two. One team would fight against Caspian, while the other would fight against the army in West Aridlands. At the borders in West Aridlands, the Diatoranian army was confused to see the Fulrenian army turn into a mess. Warriors, the Diatoranian God of War has already charged at the enemy troops, from the back. If we charge aggressively now, we'll surely succeed in repelling the enemy troops. Dax reacted immediately upon seeing the chaos breaking out amongst the Fulrenian troops. He had not announced the God of War's plan before this moment because he feared the secret would be leaked. Now that Caspian had arrived, he no longer needed to keep it a secret. When the soldiers at West Aridlands heard that Caspian Lynch, the Diatoranian God of War, was already attacking the enemy troops from the back, everyone was in high spirits. The legend of Diatorian, the Diatoranian God of War, was here. An army's morale was most important when in battle. If an army was in significantly higher morale than the enemy, it had basically won half of the war. Caspian's appearance on the battlefield disrupted Fulren's plans. As the Fulrenian troops had split into two, their attacks were no longer as aggressive. At this moment, the Diatoranian soldiers in West Aridlands were in high spirits. They started to launch an aggressive attack. Soldiers, it's time for you to kill the enemy and give back to your country. Charge forward and kill them, Dax shouted in rage. Hearing Dax's command, the soldiers were now all fired up. They had been suppressed by the Fulrenian troops, and a lot of their allies had been murdered. They had been holding in their rage. Now, their chance had come. Caspian's troops were similarly in high spirits. They attacked so aggressively the Fulrenian troops were incapable of retaliation. What's happening? Who's leading these troops? Who's their general? The general of the Fulrenian troops was consistently observing the troops that were attacking them from behind. He was confused. I think these troops are the armored battalion, led by the Diatoranian God of War. An officer in the enemy troops managed to see what was happening afar through binoculars. What? The Diatoranian God of War? It's the armored battalion led by Caspian Lynch. The general was so shocked by the words Diatoranian God of War that he shuddered fully. That's right. Only the armored battalion wears armor of this design. They fight valiantly, too, the officer replied. Are you sure you didn't mistake them for someone else? The general couldn't believe it. Would the Diatoranian God of War really lead troops in battle by himself? The soldiers in the armored battalion wear silver armor, and are all extremely strong. They're also holding flags that have the two words Armored Battalion on them. They're undoubtedly Caspian Lynch's most trusted troops. The general suddenly had a realization. Upon learning of Caspian's appearance on the battlefield, he was so scared that he started to tremble. Chapter bet on it. Never in his life did he expect to be directly fighting Caspian Lynch, the Diatoranian God of War who had never lost a single battle. He had entertained the possibility of Caspian coming to the aid of the troops in West Aridlands, but the location Caspian had shown up in was extremely surprising. He was one of the most prominent war gods in their generation, yet he had led troops to charge toward the enemy troops from behind, which sounded like a risky move. Send an emergency telegram to the command center immediately. We need reinforcements. Let's surround Caspian instead, the enemy general urged. Yes, sir, I'll contact the command center immediately. The enemy officer proceeded to do so. The Fulrenian higher-ups were floored when they heard that Caspian had invaded the enemy troops with his men. This was an excellent chance for Filren, though. This was the best time to kill Caspian. It was extremely dangerous for the chief commander of an army to infiltrate enemy troops from behind in a war of such a large scale. Despite being the chief commander of Diatoran, Caspian still had the guts to launch a sneak attack at the Fulrenian troops from behind. Now, after the arrival of reinforcements sent by the Fulrenian higher-ups, Caspian's troops would be surrounded. West Aridlands was a desert with no terrain they could use. Caspian had basically exposed himself fully. The Fulrenian higher-ups immediately sent reinforcements to West Aridlands in the form of 1,000 soldiers. Caspian's defeat would be a huge blow to the Diatoranian army. The death of a general would significantly impact his country. Caspian was the Diatoranian God of War. Diatoran might fully lose the ability to retaliate if he was defeated. Caspian was the head of the 5 war gods of Diatoran. He was a legend in the hearts of all Diatoranian soldiers. He had not lost a single battle ever since becoming the Diatoranian God of War. If they could capture Caspian alive, Diatoran might give up on fighting back, and it would be significantly easier for them to conquer Diatoran. This was a great opportunity. Of course, the Fulrenian higher-ups were going to take full advantage of it. They ordered the general stationed at the west border of Diatoran to stand their ground before the reinforcements arrived. Cassius Latham, the chief commander of Filren, was extremely excited to learn that Filren had sent 1,000 soldiers as reinforcements. He now had hope that his troops could defend themselves against the Diatoranian troops. Soldiers, the reinforcements have departed and will arrive soon. If we can stand our ground here, we'll be able to surround Caspian Lynch after our reinforcements arrive. We will surely defeat him, Cassius called out passionately to his soldiers. The thought of defeating Caspian excited Cassius. Caspian was known as the unbeatable god of war. If the Fulrenian troops could defeat him, Cassius would become much more respected and revered internationally. The Fulrenian troops were fired up as well. They started launching an aggressive attack. Caspian had led several attacks against the enemy, but their defense remained sturdy. Lord Caspian, the enemy remains determined to keep up their defense. We're in a dangerous position now. If Filren deploys the Dilrum troops, we'll end up being surrounded, Macy said, worried. You're right. And that's why we must get our task here done as soon as possible. We must defeat the enemy troops before their reinforcements come, Caspian said. Judging from the current situation, we won't be able to achieve victory within a short time, Macy said. Let me think of a good idea. Caspian was anxious, too. They had no choice but to race against the clock. Suddenly, the person in charge of the intelligence department ran over, saying, I'm here to report to Lord Caspian. We've managed to get our hands on the content of an encrypted telegram sent by the enemy. Caspian nodded. Tell us about it. Filren has sent out 1,000 soldiers as reinforcements. They're heading over here now. They want to surround us instead, the intelligence officer said in panic. Caspian frowned. He asked, how long will it take for them to arrive here? Based on the distance between them and here, I calculated that they'd arrive in 4 hours. Maybe even less than that, the officer said. Caspian's face gradually darkened. This was bad. They would have to defeat the enemy troops within these few hours. After that, his troops could assemble alongside the troops in West Aridlands and fight against the Fulrenian forces together. They would be in dire straits if they dragged this further. Contact the command center in the West Aridlands war zone immediately. I want to speak to the king, Caspian said after giving it some thought. On it. The intelligence officer nodded. The king was at the command center in the West Aridlands war zone. When he heard that Caspian wanted to speak to him, he picked up the satellite phone immediately. How are things going in the front lines, Lord Caspian? Balthazar asked. The enemy troops are countering us powerfully at the border, Your Majesty. The latest intelligence said that Filren had deployed soldiers to West Aridlands as reinforcements. They want to surround our troops instead, Caspian said. Balthazar said seriously. The situation on the battlefield often shifts unpredictably. You've infiltrated the enemy troops along with thousands of soldiers, haven't you? The situation is dire now. Exactly. I have something I want to discuss with you, Your Majesty, Caspian said. Do tell, Balthazar said. The Fulrenian reinforcements will arrive in about 4 hours, which means that we must repel the enemy troops at West Aridlands in a limited period of time, or we'll be surrounded by our enemies instead. That'll lead to the total defeat of our troops. We have no choice but to go for it without reservations, Caspian said solemnly. Do you have any strategies for that, Lord Caspian? Balthazar asked. 4 hours is a bit too short. I hope that you can send out reinforcements, Your Majesty. If we can repel the enemy troops at the borders within a limited time frame, victory will surely be ours, Caspian said. But all the manpower stationed in West Aridlands has been deployed to the borders. Where can I find the reinforcements you need? Balthazar said. You can contact Toby Hoffman and Charlie Chase. They're the generals stationed at West Fortress Gorge, which is at the intersection between North and West Aridlands. Have them lead their troops here. They'll serve as reinforcements for us. I'll lead the armored battalion in an attack, where we strike at the enemy from the back. Dax will lead his troops and attack from the front. The enemy forces will be surrounded from 3 sides. With this, we'll have a bigger shot at winning the battle, Caspian said. That's an ingenious strategy, Lord Caspian. But I noticed that the troops at West Fortress Gorge would all be deployed. What if the enemy gets word of it and attacks the gorge? Balthazar asked in worry. The bulk of Filren's troops are at the border of West Aridlands now, and the reinforcements are also heading here. The enemy is giving West Aridlands their full attention, so they won't pay any heed to whatever's going on in West Fortress Gorge, Caspian said. That's still very risky. If the enemy suddenly changes their mind, decides to attack the gorge, and breaches it, enemy troops will invade Diatoran in droves. That'll put us at a disadvantage, Balthazar remarked after giving it some thought. The situation is very dire now, and we don't have the time to hesitate, Your Majesty. That's why I said we'll have to just go for it, Caspian answered. You're making an enormous bet, Lord Caspian. If you fail, Diatoran will end up at a disadvantage. Do you have other solutions? Balthazar asked, somewhat worried. Chapter time waits for no man. I must end the battle within 4 hours. Otherwise, the troops at West Aridlands will be at a disadvantage. The troops guarding West Fortress Gorge are nearest to the border of West Aridlands. As long as they arrive within 1 to 2 hours, we can surround the Fulrenian troops from 3 sides. It'll be too late for them even if their reinforcements show up by that time, Caspian said. If you've decided, Lord Caspian, I'll make that wager along with you. I'll have the troops at the gorge head over there, Balthazar said. Your Majesty, if you're still worried, you can deploy troops from the other gorges to West Fortress Gorge. Caspian thought of another solution. Great. With that, I'm not as worried now, Balthazar said. Time waits for no man, though. The troops at West Fortress must be deployed over here as soon as possible, Caspian urged. Understood. I'll issue an order right away, Balthazar said. I'll wait for good news from your side, Your Majesty. Diatoran's reputation will be boosted further if we win this war. After that, the soldiers will surely succeed in repelling all enemy troops, Caspian said passionately. Great! You've never lost a single battle, Lord Caspian. I believe in you, Balthazar replied. I'll surely live up to my mission, Caspian answered. I have another question. You'll only have 2 hours to surround the enemy troops once the troops from West Fortress arrive. Isn't that too short a period of time? Balthazar was still somewhat worried. This battle was very important. it would impact the overall situation significantly. In order to end the battle within the shortest amount of time, I hope that the Air Force stationed at the West Aridlands war zone can be deployed as reinforcements. With that, we'll surely succeed in repelling the enemy troops, Caspian replied after some thought. Great. When you're ready to launch a general offensive at the enemy troops, I'll order the Air Force to strike, Balthazar said. If we demolish the Fulrenian troops in West Aridlands as soon as possible, we here on the battlefield is dire, Your Majesty, so I'll bid you goodbye here, Caspian said. Sure. Go watch over the battlefield, Lord Caspian. Balthazar ended the call. He immediately contacted Toby Hoffman, the general stationed at West Fortress Gorge, and had him lead his troops to West Aridlands, where they would serve as reinforcements for Caspian. After hearing from the king, Toby gathered all the soldiers stationed at the gorge and headed toward West Aridlands in the night. These troops only consisted of 1,000 soldiers, but they would surely cause huge trouble for the enemy when they charged from the flank. Caspian wanted to mess with the enemy and damper their spirits before launching a general offensive. With that, the enemy would be rendered defenseless. Caspian knew that the king had already deployed reinforcements that would come to his aid, so he wasn't in a rush to launch an attack. Everyone, wait here on standby, Caspian ordered. All soldiers paused in the middle of an attack. They retreated by a few miles and waited on standby. Caspian made a call to Dax. Dax was observing the situation on Caspian's side from satellite footage, so he asked, "Why did your troops stop attacking, Lord Caspian? Champion Santos. The enemy is making good use of the terrain, so it's hard to break their defense right now. We must think of another solution," Caspian said. "Do you have any good strategies in mind, Lord Caspian?" Dax asked. "I've already talked to the king. He'll send over troops from West Fortress Gorge to aid us. They'll arrive at the flank of the enemy troops, and we'll launch a general offensive when that time comes," Caspian replied. "Great. I'll listen to your command, Lord Caspian," Dax replied. "You should also order your troops to retreat by a few miles. Give them a 2-hour break as you wait for my command. We must repel the Fulrenian troops before their reinforcements arrive," Caspian said. "Got it. I'll follow your orders. We must repel the enemy troops at the border." Dax knew of the importance of this battle as well. Caspian would be in serious danger if they couldn't wipe out the enemy troops at the border of West Aridlands. This battle will impact the fate of West Aridlands or even Diatoran. "You must be ready," Caspian stated seriously. "I understand. These few hours will determine if we can hold on to West Aridlands. I'll definitely fight until the end," Dax promised. After ending the call, Dax gave his troops an order. They retreated by a few miles. The other soldiers took a break on the battlefield, save for some soldiers who were assigned to patrol the area. After fighting for the better half of a day, the soldiers were exhausted both physically and mentally. After Dax's order, they fell asleep soon after. The injured soldiers were also transported to the nearest hospital for treatment. The Fulrenian army was confused when they noticed how Caspian's and Dax's troops had retreated. "General, all the Diatoran troops have retreated. After fighting overnight, they're surely about to rest. We can take this chance to launch a sneak attack at them," a deputy general said. "We shouldn't move rashly. What if we fall into the enemy's trap?" Cassius said cautiously. "They'd fought overnight. It isn't likely they'll have other plans. If we attack Dax's troops now, Caspian will surely come to his aid," Cassius said. "Our tail unit will surely be able to block Caspian's advance. Dax's troops have been fighting continuously, and they must be at their last leg. This is a great chance that's very hard to come by," the deputy general said. "The command center ordered us to stand our ground here. We must not act rashly before the arrival of our reinforcements. If the command center's plans ended up being disrupted because of our presumptuous actions, who'd be responsible for that?" Cassius asked. "General, if we can breach Diatoran's line of defense before the reinforcements arrive, this will surely be lauded as a heroic deed. When the reinforcements arrive, we can advance toward Diatoran in a grand procession." The deputy general tried to convince Cassius once again. "That's enough. Shut up. I'm the one calling the shots here, and I say we must listen to the higher-ups' commands," Cassius snapped impatiently. "It's already surprising that Diatoran hasn't attacked us from both front and behind at the same time. We can wait for the enemy troops to arrive, too. If they attack us from front and behind at the same time now, our troops might not be able to handle it. Now, we just need to wait quietly for the reinforcements to arrive before we surround Caspian's troops. If we defeat Caspian, Diatoran will surely erupt in chaos. And Dax might even run away from the battlefield," Cassius told the deputy general his opinion. This deputy general was the most long-winded one he had met and was extremely pompous. "You're right, General. I was being rash," the deputy general said, lowering his head. He dared not say more. "Convey my order to the troops. Put up a sturdy defense and prepare for war. The final battle will soon be here," Cassius ordered. "Yes, General!" The deputy general nodded and left the command center. Chapter 559 Fight to the Last Ditch. "Watch the Florinian troops like a hawk. If they dare attack, we'll strike them from the back," Caspian issued an order to his subordinates. "Yes, sir," an officer replied. "Macy," Caspian called. "I'm here." Macy walked over to stand in front of Caspian. "Take the engineers with you. You guys will be burying grenades a mile behind the troops," Caspian said. "Won't this cut off our escape route from the back, though?" "We won't have any way of retreating if we need to," Macy said. "We have no other choice at this point. We only have two routes we can take. Either we advance valiantly and kill our enemies, or we die in battle. There's no situation in which we'll need to retreat," Caspian said. "Are we going to put our all into this, Lord Caspian?" Macy asked in surprise. "Yes. Only by cutting off our escape route will everyone charge forward boldly. This battle is one we must win. We must not lose," Caspian said with determination. "Got it. If we bury grenades behind the troops, the Florinian troops will be in for some trouble when they arrive," Macy said. "Exactly. This is our gift for them to celebrate our first meeting," Caspian said with a laugh. "Caspian, I have something to ask of you." Macy suddenly called Caspian by his name alone. Even Caspian didn't realize that at first. "What is it? You can just tell me about it." Caspian was very surprised to hear that Macy had something to ask of him. "Caspian, come closer. I don't want anyone else to hear me," Macy said mysteriously. "What are you doing? Do you not want to bury those grenades?" Caspian said exasperatedly. He still leaned closer to Macy, though. Just as Caspian came closer, Macy suddenly kissed him on the cheek before running out of the room, face as red as tomato. Macy didn't know if she would come out of this battle dead or alive, and she didn't want to harbor any regrets. She had wanted to do this for a long time. She had always admired Caspian greatly. After Macy left the room, she and a squad of engineers buried grenades a mile behind the troops. These grenades would explode when the Florinian reinforcements arrived, which would serve as a warning for the Diatoranian troops. Dax didn't slack off. He stayed in the command center and formulated plans for the incoming battles. He also summoned some troops from other passages. The border of West Aridlands should not be breached at all cost. The king was still in the West Aridlands war zone. The king would be in danger if the defense here was breached. At this moment, Toby led the soldiers stationed at West Fortress Gorge toward the West Aridlands war zone at full speed. He knew that the situation at West Aridlands was dire. The Florinian reinforcements would arrive soon, which would put Caspian at a disadvantage. He had to lead his troops there within the shortest time possible. Macy's squad had also made all preparations. They had buried over 1,000 grenades in the course of 2 hours. Caspian, a total of 1,200 grenades were buried, Macy reported to Caspian. Something was different from before. She dared not look Caspian in the eye. "You should call me Lord Caspian when in the army," Caspian said while looking at the time. "Yes, Lord Caspian." Macy lowered her head. She had called Caspian by his name because it sounded intimate. About 2 hours had passed since Caspian had talked to the king. The troops coming from West Fortress should be here soon, and the Diatoranian troops would launch a general offensive after that. Caspian walked to stand in front of all the soldiers and shouted, "Soldiers, we will launch a general offensive soon. We have nowhere to retreat to. Either we defeat the Florinian troops, or we die on the battlefield." At this moment, the soldiers in the armored battalion suddenly yelled, "The Diatoranian God of War will win every war. The Diatoranian God of War will win every war. The Diatoranian God of War will win every war." All the soldiers started chanting loudly, giving the Florinian troops a shock. "General, is Caspian going to launch a general offensive soon?" the deputy general on the other side asked. "Don't worry. Our reinforcements will be here soon. They will be here in an hour. With 400,000 soldiers in our troops, we will surely hold our ground until they arrive," Cassius said calmly. "Caspian is the Diatoranian God of War, though. He's known for not losing a single battle," the deputy general said. "He only has 200,000 soldiers. We have an advantage in terms of manpower as well as terrain. We have nothing to fear. When the reinforcements are here, Caspian will surely end up being dead meat." Cassius said. You're right, General. The deputy general nodded. Convey my order to the troops. Make preparations to counter the Diatoranian troops. Yes, General. Caspian's troops were so fired up that the enemy troops were somewhat panicked. At the same time, they pulled themselves together and prepared to deal with sudden happenings. A few minutes later, Caspian got a call from Toby, saying that he and his troops had already arrived at the specified location. The trip had taken 2 hours as planned. Caspian was elated. He told Toby to stay there and wait for his orders. Next, he contacted Dax. Champion Dax, Toby's troops have already arrived at the flank of the enemy troops. Are you ready? I've always been ready. I'm awaiting your command, Dax replied. Great. In 5 minutes, I'll signal a cannon fire. We're going to launch a general offensive together, Caspian said. Yes, Lord Caspian, Dax answered. Caspian ended the call and immediately contacted the king. Balthazar had been waiting for Caspian to call him. How's the situation right now, Lord Caspian? Toby Hoffman and his troops have already arrived at the flank of the enemy troops, Your Majesty. Champion Dax is ready as well. I'll order a general offensive in 5 minutes, and you can order the fighter jets at the West Aridlands war zone to take flight and start firing at the enemy, Caspian said. That's great. I'll issue a command immediately so they can aid you on the battlefield, Balthazar said. Thank you, Your Majesty. The situation is dire here. So, I won't go on any longer, Caspian said. Sure. I hope that you can succeed in repelling the enemy troops. Balthazar ended the call and issued a command to the West Aridlands war zone immediately. All fighter jets, take off now and head toward the border. More than 100 fighter jets took off at the same time, heading toward the border in a powerful procession. Caspian had the time consistently. After 5 minutes had passed, he immediately ordered, "It's time to launch a general offensive. Attack! Now!" A cannon was fired into the air. The noise was so loud it shook the ground, giving the enemy a shock. When Toby saw the cannonball in the air, he ordered immediately, "Attack now! Exterminate the enemy!" The West Fortress troops attacked immediately, utilizing all sorts of heavy weaponry. The missiles were aimed toward the Fulrenian troops. Caspian didn't rush his soldiers to attack. He fired at the enemy from a long distance first, intending to send the enemy into a frenzy before taking the next step. The enemy consistently kept tabs on Caspian. Their guns and weapons were all aimed at his troops. Cassius's biggest enemy was Caspian, as far as he was concerned. They would be able to stand their ground as long as they held Caspian back. Surprisingly, though, Diatoranian reinforcements started to attack them from the flank. Missiles were fired everywhere and blew up the Fulrenian base, causing panic among the Fulrenian troops. Cassius was consumed by panic. He ordered, "Attack the enemy at the flank first." Chapter 560, a new round of bombing. The enemy troops changed direction immediately, heeding Cassius' command. They were now surrounded by Diatoranian troops from 3 sides. Seeing that the moment was now ripe, Caspian shouted immediately, "Fire! Charge!" Right after that, Caspian's troops started firing with their heavy weapons as well. Missiles erupted within the Fulrenian troops so suddenly that they couldn't find an opening to retaliate. "Don't panic, guys. We just have to stand our ground," Cassius quickly ordered. However, his troops were completely engulfed in gunfire and unable to retaliate. How could they not panic and send themselves into a frenzy? The consecutive bombings confused the Fulrenian troops and made them disoriented. They had no idea how to retaliate at all. Caspian didn't order his troops to charge. He wanted to suppress the enemy with artillery once before taking the next step. Missiles were fired again and again, and the enemy troops were absolutely a mess while being fired at from 3 sides. "Divide the troops into 3 groups now. You guys will split up and tackle the Diatoranian troops separately," Cassius yelled at his deputy generals, who followed suit. They led their soldiers and fought back. More and more missiles were fired. Many deputy generals were blown to smithereens right after they charged. They didn't even get the chance to instruct their soldiers. The remaining deputy generals returned to their squads and started fighting back, facing west, north, or east. The soldiers' morale had been severely affected, so they weren't fighting valiantly. The bombing was still going on. Caspian had already formulated plans for the next step. He would first lure the enemy out of their base and exterminate the troops in one go. The Diatoranian troops were armed with heavy artillery, so they weren't in a rush to charge. Missiles were fired round after round without pause. The Florinian troops were utterly helpless against them. Cassius felt extremely anxious upon noticing that countless soldiers among his troops had died or been injured. The higher-ups wanted them to stand their ground here for 4 hours, but they would probably be wiped out in an hour if the bombings persisted. This was a surefire possibility unless the reinforcements arrived on time. Cassius immediately contacted Ernest Marr, who was the general leading the reinforcements. "General Marr, how much more time does it take for your troops to arrive here?" Cassius asked hurriedly. "It'll take about an hour and 50 minutes, General Latham." "Why? Why do I hear sounds of artillery fire over there?" Ernest asked in shock. "Caspian Lynch has launched a general offensive at our troops. We're surrounded by enemies from 3 sides and probably won't be able to counter them for long. Make your way here quickly," Cassius said anxiously. Ernest was even more shocked to hear that. "Weren't Lynch's troops behind you?" "Sure. There's also the Diatoranian troops at West Aridlands, but where did this third group come from?" "I'm not sure, either. I think Diatoran sent reinforcements," Cassius said. "How did they arrive so fast?" "We didn't acquire any intel about that too," Ernest said. "Let's not discuss that now. Make your way here as soon as possible, or my troops will be gone when you show up." "Your arrival will be pointless in that case," Cassius said panikedly. "On it." Ernest had his troops travel quicker after ending the call. The Diatoranian troops were attacking from 3 sides, which sent the Florinian troops into a frenzy. However, after regaining their composure, they launched an attack in retaliation, utilizing the terrain. Filron had lost more than 100,000 soldiers, though. They no longer had an advantage in numbers. At this moment, more than 100 fighter jets could be seen in the air. The loud noises attracted the attention of the Florinian troops. They had just started to sigh in relief when this scene gave them a shock. After arriving at the specified destination, the Diatoranian fighter jets started to fire missiles consecutively. Screams of pain could be heard again and again as the Florinian troops were engulfed by artillery fire again. On the ground, the Diatoranian troops started attacking aggressively from 3 sides as well. Taking the brunt of attacks from the ground and the air, the Florinian troops were absolutely helpless. Some cowardly soldiers hid themselves in the trenches and refused to come out. Cassius was grappled by panic. He screamed maniacally, "Fight back! Fight back!" His troops had lost their composure and were unable to organize an effective attack in retaliation. A bomb erupted directly on top of the Florinian command center, making a deafening noise. The command center was haphazardly constructed and thus quite flimsy. The room shook after the explosion, and dust started to fall onto the ground. Cassius and his officers present were all shocked. "We should evacuate from this place, General," one of his officers said. Right when they were about to do so, another bomb erupted. Cassius and his subordinates evacuated into the trenches they had dug in advance. "HQ, this is Cassius Latham. The Diatoranian fighter jets are consistently firing at us. Request for support." Cassius sent out a distress signal. After the Florinian HQ received the signal, they also deployed several dozen fighter jets. Caspian wasn't hasty in instructing his subordinates to charge. He wanted his troops to fire at the enemy another round. Only after heavy casualties had been incurred in the Florinian troops would he order an attack. When Ernest arrived at the border of North Aridlands, HQ sent him an emergency telegram, informing him that all soldiers stationed at West Fortress Gorge of Diatoran had left. Ernest was elated upon hearing that. "So the Diatoranian troops who attacked us from the flank came from West Fortress. Caspian Lynch is really walking on a tightrope here. Does he not fear that we'll attack West Fortress Gorge? It's obvious that Diatoran is also short of military manpower, General. This is why they had to call in reinforcements from West Fortress," a deputy general said. "And I was curious about where those reinforcements came from. Turns out he called them over from West Fortress nearby. This is a great opportunity for us," Ernest said excitedly. "Do you have a strategy in mind, General?" the deputy general asked. "Split our troops into 2 immediately. Half of our troops will attack West Fortress Gorge, while the other half will come with me to launch a sneak attack at Caspian's troops from the back," Ernest said. "Our troops will be weakened if we split into 2. General, can we really wipe out Caspian's troops if we do so?" the deputy general said. "There are no more troops at West Fortress Gorge. It should be enough if we deploy 30,000 soldiers there. The remaining soldiers will attack Caspian from the back," Ernest replied. "But Caspian Lynch is the head of the 5 war gods of Diatoran. Can we really defeat him?" the deputy general asked, worried. Everyone had heard of Caspian and what he was capable of. If Cassius manages to stand his ground against the enemy, we can surround Caspian's troops when our troops reunite, Ernest said. You're right, General. Caspian Lynch will surely lose this time, the Deputy General affirmed, feeling absolutely confident.